Hello and welcome to my video about the best Japanese albums of 2024 in my opinion. You might have just seen that I released one about my top EPs of 2024. Go check that out if you haven't yet. I released that a few days ago and this one's coming out now, and I kind of reference it too in some point, so maybe go watch that if you're so interested. So the way this is going to work is that I'm going to talk about my top 20 albums. The first 10 will go by extremely quick. I won't say too much about them, and then I will go much more in depth for the final 10. One other thing to note is that I might switch between the English and Japanese names of an album or song or artist, depending on if that has been provided by the artist, because if it has been translated to English, that means that is the official title of what they want something to be called, so that's what I will refer to out of respect for them, even if I think there might be a better translation, but I don't really foresee that coming up too much. So at number 20, we have the new Shin Ringo album called Hojoya, and my favorite song here would be Roman to Soroba featuring Hikaru Utada. Number 19 is going to the Atlas sound team for the Persona 3 Reload soundtrack. This thing rocks. My favorite song here would be Changing Seasons Reload. Number 18 is going to the artist Aimyon with her new album Jealous of Cats. My favorite song on here is going to be the one called Not Okay. Number 17 is one I've already covered on my channel, and that is going to 7th Jet Balloon with their self-titled debut album 7th Jet Balloon. My favorite song on here would be the one called Fuck Summer. Enough said. Number 16 is going to the artist Yuma Abe with his new album Hotel New Yuma. And my favorite song on here would probably be Tomodachi-sa. Number 15 is another one that I've covered on the channel. This will be going to the album Nature and Computers by OGRE You Asshole. And my favorite song on here would be Outside of the House Alternative Version. Number 14 is another I've covered, which is going to be the album Illusion by the band Ryusenkei. And my favorite song on here would be Moshikashitara Futari. Number 13 is going to the artist Moe with her debut album Occult. My favorite song on here is Muse. I talked about this on my channel. Love this album. Please go check this out, especially Muse. This is like a 10 out of 10 song, easy. Number 12 is going to the band muque with their album Dungeon. And my favorite song on here would be Jabber. Number 11 is going to the band Cephalo with their debut album Fluorite Code. My favorite song on here is probably End of Summer Vacation. And yeah, that's the first 11. So let's get on to the meat. In the number 10 spot is the math rock album Beyond the Ages by the band Ante. This is probably some of the cleanest math rock I've heard in a long time. As I mentioned in my video, they kind of pull a lot of inspirations from all sorts of places, though I think it all coalesces very well in the end product and is a fantastic math rock album from start to finish. My cat, y'all see that? That's like a twice a week sort of thing around here. So anyway, I really like this album, and honestly, it's kind of refreshing in the math rock space too. I feel like a lot of math rock music lately has been kind of pulling more so from Midwest emo. However, this album, like I said, it's just very clean and very clear and precise, and it really knows what it wants to be based off those influences. This is a quintessential math rock album that is going to give you exactly what you want, such as weird time signatures, a sort of jazzy feel to it, a kind of hard rock but not too hard or punk rock sort of vibe, and it's very technical, and it is really what a math rock listener wants out of a math rock album. And so because it's so on the mark like that, I really enjoyed listening to it all throughout this year. In the number 9 spot, we have the album Mukuge by Mamiko Suzuki. I also covered this one in a video, and kind of my synopsis from that is that this album is just beautifully arranged and composed and just sung and rapped and just played. It is just a beautiful sounding album. In my opinion, Mamiko really struck gold with this sort of change of like musical scenery. And so as you can imagine, this album evokes a lot of like environmental and kind of natural sorts of elements and motifs and just musical scenery. For instance, I can't not listen to that very first song called Utsutsu and not picture this like beautiful morning in a garden. There's a sunrise, there's maybe a hummingbird, maybe some bugs, not the bad ones, but maybe a few, like some ants or something, and there's just flowers everywhere, and there's very distinct aromas in the air. You know, that is how this album sounds, feels, and smells like to me. As I mentioned in my review, the lyrics are just so sweet and cute on this album, and are just everything you want to hear from someone you love. It's just cute. It's just so cute. And I really feel like every backing musician really nailed it here as well. And of course, they are also largely responsible for this kind of musical tapestry that Mamiko paints over with with her voice. As I stated in my review, my favorite song continues to be Night Out Drinking. Number 8 is going to an album that I've been wanting to talk about for a while now. That is going to be Kudaranai Ichinichi's Doitsumo Koitsumo. This album is like punk rock energy incarnate. It's a little mathy, but I really feel like they hone in on that sort of punk sound here, though there are also still traces of Midwest emo too, just from the kind of sound of the electric guitars and just based off everything in that sort of instrumental and sonic sort of realm. I think the lead singer Takane really gives it his all across this entire album, and honestly, that's because that's just what these tracks deserve, in my opinion. With this album, I feel every strum, every beat, every yell just in my chest. It is so hard-hitting. I love it so much. This album just has so many really hard-hitting and cool songs, and it really just takes no prisoners. I will say that the first few songs kind of had to grow on me, though I feel like once you hit songs like Moment or like Gunpla, oh, this album hits so incredibly hard. With that said, I think my favorite song is probably the one called Moment, though there are probably 3 others that are in close contention for that number 1 spot. In the number 7 spot, we have the album Pop Delivery by Wednesday Campanella. Now this is another that I made a video on too, and boy did I like it. This is a fantastic album that really sounds like you are on like a trip around the world. And that's mainly because there are so many sort of cultural sounds pulled from all over the world and then utilized on this album, and boy are they utilized well. I feel like pretty much every moment on this album exists just for the like purpose of fun and for dance. And with this album sounding like a total pastiche of sounds, the fun never stops. I think probably the highlight for me would be Utaha casually switching between very hard rap bars and swelling vocals just on the fly. She is truly a fantastic singer, and because of that, I think she's a perfect fit as the new singer for Wednesday Campanella. I think arguably this is one of the hardest pop albums I've ever heard, and that's primarily because of the production. As usual, the producer Kenmochi Hitafumi really cooked for this album, and I don't know how he can possibly outdo himself yet, though I say that after everything he releases. So it's entirely possible he continues to get even better and better and better. Choosing my favorite song for this one's really difficult, but if I really had to go with something, I'd probably say the Big Four. A lot more have grown on me since I reviewed this album, but I think the Big Four just barely kind of inches it out. Number 6 is going to go to the album Underlight Aftertime by the band Downt. So this is another album that I covered in a video, and as I listen to it more and more, I seem to appreciate it more and more as well. What on the surface is just kind of a math rock Midwest emo Japanese album is actually more of an attempt to create a certain atmosphere and presence, and this almost live show-esque sort of setting, I feel like. For instance, the opening song Underdrive really feels and sounds like how a band would start a live show as their very first song. And so the atmosphere that I mentioned really continues to kind of build throughout the entirety of the track list as well. I think this is partly because of the interludes, one of which is called 8/31YDA011, which is just absolutely lovely and really sounds beautiful when wearing good headphones. There are some hints of rain and just water in general, and boy, it sounds fantastic. On top of that too, the actual non-interlude songs hit hard. I love the lyricism, I love the instrumentation, there are some fantastic guitar licks. My favorite song continues to be the one called 111511, which, as I mentioned in my video, has probably one of my favorite guitar licks of all year, maybe all time. That one's really up for debate, but definitely all year. Okay, so with that said, we are now at number 5. And one thing I want to mention before we go any further is that choosing my absolute favorites in order here became really hard. And that's because I feel like on maybe any other year, any of these 5 could have been number 1 if the others hadn't existed. This was so insanely hard for me to choose, and I almost feel bad putting number 5 at number 5 or number 4 at number 4 for that exact reason. Regardless, the number 5 spot is going to Hakushi Hasegawa's Mahogako. This album is just probably the most colorful and beautiful sounding tornado of sound that I've ever heard in my whole life. This is an electronic album, but it's also kind of orchestral, and it's also kind of pop. It's also kind of soft rock. It's really all over the place. And the fact that Hakushi was actually able to navigate the ins and outs of each of these very distinct genres and really assemble them into this sort of Voltron of sound is just incredible. I feel like the album really serves as a conduit to combine the best parts of slow, melodic, orchestral pop with the harsher parts of industrial music and also hyperpop. And because of that, I think the album really exhibits Hakushi's knowledge of both pop and industrial electronic sounds, and how to create something that perfectly blends the extreme opposite poles of each genre into something that is perfect. And so while I could probably go on about the production forever, I also really need to mention Hakushi's vocals as well. They sound fantastic along every song that they are either singing or like rasping or screaming or yelling or making weird guttural throat sounds. Songs like Forbidden Thing are just simply beautiful and further exhibit their proficiency as a songwriter. And so for that song, I really feel like the instrumental could actually serve for a really good Japanese singer, such as maybe like A.O.R, maybe Ado. So honestly, props to Hakushi for keeping that for themselves, because they could have shopped that around and made a lot of money, I feel like. There is one song on this album towards the end called Boy's Texture. And there's just something about that song that kind of like ignites my cerebral cortex. And I don't know if it's the guitar, I don't know if it's the production, I don't know if it's this like sampling of these ad-libbed vocals that are all throughout the song, but there's something about it that just feels good in my brain. I love that song. And so for that reason, the song Boy's Texture is my absolute favorite on this album. But man, is there some real heat and gold all across this track list. Beautiful, fantastic album, and so unlike pretty much anything else I've ever heard. Number 4 is going to another album that I covered in a video. That is going to be Now I See the Light by the math rock band Toe. So there's nothing really more that I can mention here that I hadn't already in my 20-minute review for that album. And I would recommend you go watch that, not just because it's a great video, but also because I go over all of the lyrics on the album. And there is some fantastic wordplay, lyricism, and singing on the album too that I can't really articulate in a video like this or on my YouTube at all because of like copyright reasons. But you need to go listen to this album and also watch my video as a companion piece, because if you're unfamiliar with Japanese, you're going to be missing out on a lot of the content in this album. And especially with that wordplay aspect, that's not something that, you know, Google Translate is going to like solve for you. So if you're really interested in it at all, please go watch my video. I'll have it linked probably over here somewhere. Actually, no, I think it goes over there. Yeah. I think this is the perfect comeback album that anyone could ever want. This is what I've been waiting on. Really and truly. I love this so much. And just to get a little English major with it too here. Much like the title of the albums and songs alludes to, this album harnesses the oppressive and self-indulgent aspects of solitude and loneliness. And it is utilized in a way to communicate that those isolating feelings aren't so isolating as one may think, and that avenues of escaping it are everywhere around you if you're willing to look and reach out to other people. So my favorite song is probably Who Knows? So yep, number 4. I wish I could have placed it higher, but there was other great music out this year. So speaking of that, we are now at the number 3 spot, and that is going to go to XinU's newest album called Adult-Oriented Romance, aka A.O.R. This album is about love. It's a lovely album about love. And if you don't believe me, check this out. My notes are just the word love 5 times in a row, so it must be true. This album features just beautiful singing from XinU and beautiful production from her constant collaborator Shohei Matsushita. Regarding that production, this album just features a perfect marriage of acoustic instrumentals and electronic production. With that said, the genres present on this album include acid jazz, trap, bedroom pop, jungle, and R&B. It's all over the place, but it is seamless in its execution. As you may know from my other videos, I'm sort of a stickler for tracklist sequencing. And so with that said, I don't know how many versions of the tracklist they had to go through to figure out what they liked, but man, the end product is a seamless sloping and then sloping back up trajectory. I love it so much. This album is just so well crafted in every aspect. And as I mentioned in my review, this album just oozes Christmas spirit. Oh my god. And it's like not even really trying to at all. I think it's because of the very romance-oriented lyrics, but also there are a lot of sounds indicative of Christmas across this album too. There are some like MIDI sleigh bells used throughout the album, and I think that's what's really selling it for me for the most part. And also each song just has a very optimistic and playful view of love that really embraces you with its like sort of fua lyrics. It's so nice. Oh, it's so cute. I love this album. Honestly, I have had this on repeat since it came out earlier this month. I listened to the album at least once per day. And so as I mentioned in my review, my favorite song is Tokete Yuku. That song is just so cute, even though it's kind of a breakup song, but it's still got a very cute presentation to it. Love it so much. And so now we are at the number 2 spot. Now, this is where it got extremely hard for me because I love these final two albums for different reasons. So my number 2 spot is going to go to the album Gene by the artist A.O.R. I think this was my 3rd or 4th review I made on my channel. When I made that review, I was kind of lukewarm on a few songs in the track list, but as time has gone on, this is another album that I listened to through completion almost every single day, and all of those songs are perfect home runs for me now. This album is comprised of a lot of singles that A.O.R. had been releasing over the past few years, and yes, while you could call it a glorified collection of just singles, I think A.O.R.'s ability to integrate her style of singing and songwriting perfectly with any genre really proves her to be a musical force of nature. There are some songs on here that are very drum and bass, and then there's some that are very trap, and then there's some that sound like they were produced by Flying Lotus. There are some that sound like they're straight from an ABBA album. It's insane. Her versatility is just off the charts. And one of my favorite songs, called Borderline, is like her featuring herself, because normally she sings in a very high and kind of cutesy register, but on that song, she actually sings in her regular voice. So it's like there are these like two opposing identities on the album, which is also why the song is called Borderline. But I just love how she can ham up her character and then draw that back to almost sound like a completely different person. And of course, that also flows into the way in which she writes songs too. For instance, she can totally write songs about being an awful homewrecker on songs such as Love Is Always, while also admitting to a very romantic, gravitational pull-like attraction to someone on the song Planet. And I'm here for all of it. And I believe all of it, because she just really sells it. So with that said, I rated this album very highly. I feel like it could verge on a 10, depending on how I'm feeling. But I think as time goes on, I'm just going to appreciate this album more and more and more. So a 10 seems fairly likely for me to re-review in my head at some point in the future. I think picking a favorite song on here is extremely hard. I think if I am in a mood in which I want a very intimate microbeat filled bedroom funk song, I would go with the one called Tenshi. Or if I'm sort of feeling like I want to let loose and bob my head, wiggle my shoulders, I'd probably go with Racy, just because it's this very electrified disco track. Really hard to choose a favorite song on this one in particular. And with that, we are now at the number 1 spot. This album is one that came out in January of this year, but I have not made a video on it yet. I have tried 3 separate times, but I never really liked my end product because I wasn't really content with the way I covered it, because I feel like this album deserves a lot more than what I could give it just in a review. So I want to make a video on it at some point. I just don't know what kind of format I want it to be. I think it might be very long, and I'm okay with that. I just know that I want to talk about it in length. Enough said there. My album of the year is going to go to Empire by the band Ryusenkei. This album is all over the place. However, its central theme is about a breakup. Instead of focusing on the breakup itself, this album is about Arisa Ushimaru's fixation on the emotional turmoil and self-doubt that comes after. So I don't know who hurt Arisa Ushimaru, but I'm gonna find him. I'm gonna find him. I'm gonna make him pay, because my girl's not okay, and I'm gonna... No, but I hope she's okay, because this is like the saddest and most like destructive album I think I've maybe heard in my life. Every chorus, every verse, every line, and every analogy out of Arisa's mouth is just heartbreaking and, like I said, destructive. Each song on this album is an attempt to get herself out of her post-breakup funk, and she is losing the war. She is doing so poorly. Pretty much every song is a new attempt that she is verbalizing for her to get over this other person, and she just can't. So each song on the track list is her just kind of like bearing her soul and continually failing. And it is extremely hard to listen to, and so for that reason, I've kind of stayed away from this album this whole year because it's just so depressing to hear, and I feel like you just get so attached to the outcome and the feelings that are represented throughout the album. I just got too close, and I was like, I gotta back away. So as much as I love this album, I probably listened to it all the way through no more than like 20 or 30 times since January, because like, I just need a break. And if this is a very non-fictional album, and if Arisa is still going through this, then like, I hope she's okay, because this is like heartbreaking stuff. So as I mentioned, she fails to kind of overcome this very tragic emotional event throughout each song on the album. And in particular, the very last song, her ego has been so broken to the point where she really loses touch with who she is, and she can't be an independent person anymore. And there is the final verse from that song that I'd like to highlight here too. The final song is called A Familiar Empire. Of course, that harkens back to the title of this album as well. So as always, this is my interpretation of the lyrics. Every person who translates this will have their own interpretation and translation because Japanese and English don't have a one-to-one sort of translation setup ratio. So this is what I think fits, but someone else might use other words or phrases to kind of explain what's happening here. So with all that said, here's that verse. We still sort of talked, but I pretended not to care. Because I'm all right now. Go somewhere else and live your life at your own convenience. A body made of flour, a sloppy room, a stain placed on someone. I resembled all of those things. How can you talk someone out of that, right? One other thing to note is that Arisa is actually half like Australian. And so because of that, her English seems to be fairly good. And this song actually ends with her speaking English for maybe a good like 10-15 second period, which is longer than any other point on the album. And so it ends with her basically just saying like, I couldn't believe in myself, I want to believe in myself, I can't believe in myself. She is just so beaten down at this point that, you know, I really hope she's okay, because this is like some rough shit, dude. Oh my God. I think this album is like truly a beautiful piece of art that postulates the question raised by the title of the album. What is an empire? Is it our memories? Is it our relationship with our friends and our families? Since it's an empire, is there someone controlling all of it? Are we controlling it? Can we control it? I don't really know. And that's kind of what I like to think about whenever I listen to this album. I try to figure out that question, and I feel like I've had some success, but I don't think I'll ever know the answer. And I just really like when an album finishes and then leaves you with those sorts of questions. I think that's a very, like I said, artistic kind of thing to do. I really applaud Arisa for pulling that off as well as she did. So yeah, for that reason, this is my album of the year. I think it is a fantastic piece of some of the most depressing writing you'll ever hear in your life. But it's really worth it, I think. The lyrics are fantastic. I think Arisa nailed all of her vocals across the whole album. I really want to applaud every member of the band on the fantastic job that they did on this album, because it is truly a hallmark rock and maybe like art rock album for me that I know I'm going to love for like years to come. So with that said, fantastic job to the following people. That is going to be Arisa Ushimaru on vocals and guitar. That is going to be Gokin on bass, Doki Taiyo on guitar, and Horie on drums. And on the production side, fantastic job to Fumiaki Unehara and Ayaka Toki and Reina Koyanagi. They all did a fantastic job to create this 10 out of 10 perfect album. I think this is an 11 out of 10 album, and that is why it is my album of the year. Thank you to everyone who made music for me and other people to consume this year. It's been a real blast, and this is probably one of the best years of music in probably Japanese history for me, but also just as a whole, because fantastic albums came out from all over the world this year that I loved listening to, especially Brazil. They had a really big year for me this year, so I'm hoping that kind of continues next year too. With that said, I really enjoyed every piece of music that I heard this year, and I hope all of the bands that I highlighted here continue to make amazing music, and even the ones that I did not mention here, I still loved a lot of your stuff, and I really hope to continue to hear from you soon and shortly and expeditiously, because I love music and I love your music, and that's why I cover it, because I love your music. So thank you so much, and thank you for watching. Hopefully you got some good recommendations out of this video and my last one about EPs, which I will have linked somewhere. So yeah, thank you so much. Let's have a cool and nice 2025, and thank you so much for watching.